Hey everybody, this is The Loop. I want to talk to you about two things today. First of all, I talked about it last week. I want to make sure you've got it on your calendar. We've got our hayride and bonfire and potluck at Hazeltine Farms. All that information is on your screen below, and it's also in your program you got on your way in, so make sure you get that on your calendar. It's a blast. Make sure you don't miss it. Number two, we also are going to try something for the first time this year, and it's called Treat Street. We've been doing it at our Beloit and McChesney Park campuses in previous years, and it's just an opportunity to do a trunk or treat right after church on Sunday, October 28th. And so our hope is a couple of things. Number one, invite your friends. If they've got little kids, it's the perfect weekend to invite them to church. But then also, for those of you guys, especially those of you guys who are in a Thrive group, we want to invite you to take your Thrive group and decorate a car. Get a car filled with candy. Do it together as a group. We'll do it right after church, there'll be plenty of opportunity to get info, including in your program. I think that's everything. I'm excited. Kellen gets a chance to preach today, and I can't wait to hear what God does through that. Next week it'll be David. Thank you guys so much for being here. This has been The Loop. Now you're in it.
All right, so when I was a kid, I don't know how many of you were like me, but when I was a kid, there was something in me that I think as kids, we don't always think that our parents always have our best interests at hand or are trying their hardest to protect us. See, I had this issue with, I was a total night owl, even from the time I was a little kid. I was in kindergarten. I remember we'd have to go to bed at like 8:30 or 9 o'clock or whatever, and I would still be up at 10:30. I'd go out and watch the sports news real quick, and then I'd go back into bed, and I'd fall asleep like 11:15. But here was the problem: is I knew around between 11 and 11:30, that the TV was probably going to get turned off in the living room, and I was always worried about that. That's a lot of the reason why I would stay awake, because I knew the moment that the TV went off, the hall light was going to go off soon, and my parents were going to go to bed and fall asleep. And what that meant in my little child's brain was any bad person who came into the house was going to find me first, because I was the only one still awake, and I was going to die. I don't know why this is the way that my brain thought, but it's the way my brain thought. And here's the deal. I got to a point where I kind of started to think that maybe I was crazy. Maybe I was the only person who ever was like this. And then I had kids. And I realized that kids just kind of do things like this, or at least the ones in my family do. And so maybe it's just our bloodline. We're crazy. But something happened. My kids, it's like they tend to sometimes have zero trust that I am there to protect them. And so sometimes we'll be in the living room, we'll be just hanging out, maybe watching some TV, or the girls are playing a game or something like that. And I decide to go down into the basement for a couple minutes. Maybe I got to change the laundry or whatever. I don't do that a whole lot, I'll be honest. But I go downstairs for whatever, and the girls, all of a sudden, after a minute or two, I hear like this blood-curdling scream. And this is all it is. Dad! Dad! It just keeps going for a little bit. And in my brain, I'm literally thinking, okay, one of them fell down some steps. Maybe one of their arms fell off and blood is squirting out. Maybe somebody came into the house with a machete. Like, I don't know. So I go run upstairs, and I get up there, and I'm panting, I'm breathing hard. I'm like, girls, what's up? What's wrong? Like, are you guys all okay? Is somebody in the house? Do I have to kill somebody with my bare hands? And then one of them, kind of in these tearful cries, it's just, we didn't know where you were. Those of you who know my daughters know I'm not actually exaggerating this at all. And so now I'm thinking, why? Why would you give me a heart attack because you don't know where I am? Why can't you get off the couch and figure out where I'm at? But instead of, it's like it doesn't go through my kid's brain like it would, like it should. You know, the idea of, I don't know where Dad is. Maybe he went downstairs to go do laundry. Maybe I'll go look down there. Instead, it goes in my kid's brain sometimes like, I don't know where Dad is. I bet he went outside, got in the car, and drove away, and he's telling somebody to come and scare us. Like, that's what goes in their heads. I don't understand. Here's the thing. Fear is a real thing in our lives. Fear is a real thing in kids' lives. It is an incredibly real thing in my kids' lives. And it's something that we're not going to ever really get away from. The truth is, we all still fear things. I think we get a little bit more sophisticated in the things that we fear. I'm not scared to like be in my house alone all by myself anymore because I'm a big tough guy. But I fear losing a job or people in my family getting sick or not being safe or whatever. I'm a little scared of the dark. I'll be honest, just a little bit. But we have more sophistication in the way that we deal with our fear now. Instead of screaming and rolling around the floor and crying all this stuff, we do a lot better things with our fear. We get ulcers. Our hair goes gray. We overeat. Our blood pressure skyrockets. We got a really good handle on this fear thing. We're doing great with it. Fear is a real thing for us, and sometimes it can stop us in our tracks. It can put us in a neutral for a long time, and sometimes our fear is so debilitating that it just puts us in reverse altogether. If we're ever going to thrive in this life that God has given us, somehow we're going to have to get a handle on this thing called fear. We're about to look at a story with Jesus and some of his closest friends. And the truth is, even though Jesus' closest friends were with Jesus all the time, they still had issues with this thing called fear. And this story is a story from the book of Mark, chapter 4. And so you can take out a Bible, take out your phone of the Bible. If you can read off the screen, just read off the screen. But we're going to take a look at this story from Mark chapter 4. And here's what it says. That day when evening came, Jesus said to his disciples, "Let us go over to the other side." Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall or a storm came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. I don't know about you, but other than the resurrection, this might be the craziest story in the Bible. He said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" And they were terrified, and they asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." I think for most of my life, as I've read this story, I've kind of pitied the disciples as I read it. Because I think to myself, if I were in their situation, I think I'd be doing the same thing. Like, I don't like water. So it's the number one reason why you'll never see me do a triathlon, because I will drown. Big open bodies of water, not cool. And then you add a storm to it and waves coming over the boat. And now Jesus is just sleeping. Like, Jesus, wake up. We're going to drown. I'd be thinking the same thing. It would terrify me. But see, Jesus was tired. He had been out all day preaching good things to the people in the area. And the bottom line is he needed a break. And the disciples could sense that he needed a break. And so they grab a pillow and they say, "Hey, go to the stern, the place, the honored place of the boat, go to the stern and take a nap." And so Jesus was taking a nap. But the moment that the storm got to be too much for these guys, every rational thought that would have otherwise gone through their brains went out the window. They started thinking that, man, maybe Jesus doesn't know what's going on. Maybe Jesus just doesn't even care about what's going on. He's fine if we die. And here's what I think is very likely the case. These guys that Jesus is with, these best friends of Jesus, they had not really bought into the idea yet that Jesus was more than just a great rabbi. They hadn't bought into the idea that Jesus was more than just a great teacher. And the thing here is, I'm not 100% sure, I don't know if anybody is, if the book of Mark is written chronologically, but if it was, let's just say it was, we've already seen in the book of Mark that Jesus has healed a man on a Sabbath who had a crippled hand, he healed him just with the words of his mouth. He healed another man who was paralyzed that his friends had dropped through a hole in the roof that they'd created so that they could drop him down to Jesus where he was talking. And Jesus healed that man. Jesus healed a man with leprosy. There were people who were demon-possessed that when Jesus would walk by, these people would literally shout out, the demons inside them would shout out, Jesus, you're the Son of God. And so we've seen, and we already know that for sure that these disciples have known at least about one miracle. The first miracle Jesus ever did was at a wedding, turned water into the best tasting wine there. They have seen that Jesus has some kind of supernatural power. The disciples had no reason not to believe that Jesus had a power that was otherworldly. They had already seen it. But for some reason, something was still terrifying them. Now, granted, yeah, they're probably scared of drowning. I get that. But it's also as though they're afraid that Jesus is not going to choose to do anything about what they're fearful of. Like he's just going to leave them in the dust. This is an area that I actually get annoyed with as a parent. I think like a lot of kids, my kids are scared to go down in a basement by themselves. And when we moved to this house, we did everything we could to make the basement as inviting as possible. The brightest lights that you can possibly put, well, not the brightest, but pretty bright lights, new carpet, new painting. Like it's a nice atmosphere. But they don't like to go down there, and I get it. Basements, there's something about being 6 feet under the ground, I think, that just terrifies us, right? And so my kids, my two oldest kids, they already do the laundry, which is awesome because I don't want to have to do it. And so when they have to go do the laundry, they got to go downstairs. Sometimes they got to go down by themselves. But it's like they think as long as I go down there with them, that whatever was going to happen to them is no longer going to happen. I don't know if they think, hey, if somebody's down there and is going to kill us, they're going to kill Dad and I can get away. I don't know what it is. But they think that they'll be fine with me. And so sometimes they'll ask me, hey, Dad, can you come downstairs with me? Problem is, if you have kids, you might know that the ask is not quite that way. The ask a lot of time goes a little bit like this. Oh, Dad, come downstairs with me. And right then I'm like, no. Like there's that thing inside you that's like, no, I'm not going to do whatever you're asking me to do right now. It's like my kids get to this point of desperation of like, I don't want to be downstairs so badly, and I'm desperate. Dad, you got to come down. And instead, if they would just kind of ask in a little bit of faith, like, Dad maybe he wants to help me out. Dad, hey, could you come downstairs? Yeah, I totally will. The ask shows a lot about what we're thinking. Jesus' friends in the boat, they're acting kind of like little kids. We don't see them come up to Jesus in the boat after it's getting a little stormy and tap him on the shoulder and like, hey, Jesus, just want you to know, I don't know if you know, but there's a storm. I know you know everything. Okay, I get it. But you're not doing much. Could you maybe help us get across the lake? I don't know how you're going to do it. Maybe calm the storm, something. And I'm guessing that if that had happened, Jesus had been like, yeah, sure, no problem. But they came to him in desperation. Jesus wakes up to his friends freaking out, screaming at him in total despair. And I think we need to be honest with ourselves about this. We look at it and sometimes we ask ourselves, man, why are the disciples like that? The truth is, you and I are like that with God a lot of the time. Desperation. We have this supernatural, all-loving Jesus. He's right at our fingertips, and we still find ourselves afraid. And we've got bills coming up at the end of the month, and we feel like we have no prayer of seeing those bills get paid. We've got kids who are struggling with issues, and we cannot, for the life of us, see them getting to a place where they are whole and healthy. We're out of shape, and we're feeling lazy and lethargic, and it's like we just can't see how we're ever going to get out of that. We're lonely. We're in need of some friends to come around us, but we feel like every time we've had friends come around us, it's not too long until they see who we really are and they're gone. Fear is a natural reaction to the broken world around us. we need to understand fear is a natural reaction. Sometimes we think of fear as being the worst thing that we could ever have, but it's not. If there is a gun that's being aimed at you right now, fear is naturally going to well up within you. If your kid is hanging off of a balcony, fear is naturally going to come up in you. It's not something that you have a choice. We go to malls, and I hate malls because for some reason, designers of malls all think, hey, it's cool to cut a big hole in the floor so we can see 5 floors down. And then kids can walk close to the edge. I know that there's railings. It doesn't matter if you're scared of heights. Okay? Every time my kids go up there, this fear wells up within me, and I'm like, get away. Fear is actually, now there's irrational fear out there that is just insane. But fear, in a lot of ways, can be a healthy thing for us. It's this thing I think that God even gives to us that allows us to understand, I need to back away from this situation, need to fix this situation a little bit. It's the reaction to our fears that can be damaging. The reaction to our fears are the things that will either press us onward or they're going to hold us back. Despair and faith are the 2 choices that we face when we're confronted with our fear. Despair and faith. Here's the deal. I am not a trained military person, but I feel like I've watched enough like Jason Bourne movies and Jack Ryan movies or books. I believe I've watched enough of that if an international terrorist was coming after me, I'd defeat him. I believe it. No, some of you don't believe it. Here's the deal. The truth is I'm terrified of any kind of confrontation. If somebody came up with a fist like this, I'd be like, no, I'm good. I'd run away. Because I'm this. I'm short. I'm not going to do anything to anybody. In fact, Theodore Roosevelt, his foreign policy, I loved it. It was speak softly and carry a big stick. My policy has always been, I talk tough, and then when somebody brings out a big stick, I run. Like, that's who I am. But from watching movies like Jason Bourne, it seems like you have one of 2 choices when it comes to someone who's trying to kill you. You can either let fear get the best of you, and you can go into despair mode. And when you go into despair mode, you don't think clearly, and you do stupid things, and you get yourself killed. Or you can go the other route. You can have faith in your training. And you can let your training inform your decision-making, and you might stand a chance. Sure, you might still get beat, but you stand a chance. See, we are going to face situations in life where fear is going to be a part of everything. The question is, are we going to let our fear lead us into despair, or are we going to let our fear get us to a place where we have a faith and a trust in God in that situation? The question we've got to ask ourselves is, the question is not, are we going to find fear? The question is, how are we going to choose to react when fear comes upon us? And we see what the disciples chose. The disciples came to Jesus in despair. In their moment of struggle, they came to Jesus in despair. They actually asked the question of whether or not they thought Jesus even cared, if he wanted them to live. That seems crazy. But again, we come to God in despair too. Every day I think something goes through my brain of like, God, why would you want to do this to me? It's happening again. Every year with the Vikings. God, do you really want me to die with them not winning the Super Bowl? And he keeps saying yes. It's getting disheartening, people. What's toughest for the disciples is that you can make the claim that their inability to fully have their faith invested in Jesus, it limited them in their ministry, in their everyday ministry life. In Matthew 17, there's a story about a man who has a sick child. And he comes to Jesus and says, hey, Jesus, my child has been having seizures like crazy. And these seizures cause him to get physically hurt. Sometimes he's fallen into fire. Sometimes he's fallen into water. Can you please heal my son? And Jesus heals the son. There was a demon inside this child, and he cast this demon out of the child, and the child stopped having seizures. But this wasn't the first time that this father had brought his son to somebody to have him be healed. He had brought his son to the disciples earlier, but the disciples weren't able to do anything. And so when the disciples saw Jesus heal this boy, they were thinking, man, why couldn't we do that, Jesus? And Jesus, in Matthew 17, verse 20, he actually points to their lack of faith. He says, it's because you have so little faith. Truly, I tell you, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you. Now, I'm going to be honest, this passage is obviously tough for us because we don't see on a regular basis supernatural healings taking place. I believe they do happen. I believe I've witnessed them happen, but it doesn't happen super often. But in this story, here's what I do know. The disciples didn't completely lack faith. Jesus said it himself, that their faith was so little. But here's the thing. They hadn't fully invested their faith into the supernatural power of who Jesus actually was. They hadn't fully invested their faith yet. And they figured that God had a certain amount of power that he could give them, and I think that that's how we go to God a lot of the time. I know it's how I go to God. I know that Jesus is supernatural and he's powerful and he can do anything he wants. But it's like I ask him, God, just do just enough to get me by. It's like I just lack a little bit of that faith. I feel like I'm like another person in the Bible who had another sick child. This guy was a centurion, and he came to Jesus, and he's like, hey, Jesus, can you heal my kid? Jesus is like, I don't know, can I? He's like, yeah, I know. I believe that you can heal my kid, but help me in my unbelief. This is the awesome news that we have today. Your faith isn't required to be always perfect all the time. Faith isn't always required to be always perfect all the time. Sometimes all you can really muster is this desperate cry out to God for what you need. Sometimes all you can muster is going to the front of the boat in the midst of the storm and shaking Jesus and screaming at him, I need some help. Do something for me. Sometimes all you can muster is going to bed in tears, begging for God's mercy on your child. Even though you don't have much faith that stuff's going to change, you're giving your last ounce of hope to Jesus. Sometimes all you can do is go to God and ask him one more time that he would help you one more month to get your rent paid. And frankly, faith for the next month is just going to have to wait for another day. Just because your faith in life isn't perfect doesn't mean that God doesn't reward it. I want you to listen to what Jesus says in Matthew 7, verses 9 through 11. Which of you, if your son asks for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will give him a snake? If you then, though you are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask him? I want you to understand something this morning. It is okay for you to go to God in despair. That's okay. If that's all you have, Jesus is still a kind and a loving Savior who wants to give you good gifts. He still stopped the wind and he stopped the waves for his friends in the boat who really didn't quite get what he was all about. I think leaning on Jesus in our despair, it is kind of this beginning place of our real faith. Letting him bring forth a miracle in your life in the midst of your storm is something that will help you the next time that you get in a situation like that to go from despair to actually having faith that Jesus can do something powerful in your life. It wasn't going to be until after Jesus was killed and then rose from the dead. It wasn't until then that his own best friends actually got to the point where they understood what this full faith looked like. It wasn't until they were hit upside the head with the supernatural power of Jesus that they really got to the point where fear became a non-issue for them. It took time. It took time experiencing God's goodness and supernatural ability in the midst of the storms. And frankly, most of these guys, they went way past the point of despair at times. Jesus' best friend, Peter, the night that Jesus got arrested, Peter didn't even have any faith at that point. He just totally told people, I don't even know who that guy is. But here's what's cool. Jesus didn't give up on Peter. The risen Jesus, after he had risen from the dead, he came back to Peter and he confirmed to Peter, he lovingly confirmed to Peter what his role was going to be in telling people about the good news of who Jesus was. And thousands of people came to know Jesus because of what Peter did. Every single one of these disciples, at some point, they got past the point of despair, to even beyond despair, to the point that they didn't acknowledge who Jesus was as their friend. But later on, after they had experienced Jesus risen from the dead, it all changed. It changed to the point that they were willing to die. Every single one of them died an awful death instead of giving up their faith in who he was. Your faith in Jesus may not look or feel very powerful right now, and that's okay. In your moments of desperation, are you willing to give even just that small amount of faith and put it in Jesus? There's beauty in what happens when we go to God in our despair, in the midst of our fear. The next time that fear comes, there's a little bit less despair and there's a little bit more faith. Let me tell you what I mean by that. So a lot of you know for a number of years here, I've been taking kids on little missions trips up to an Indian reservation in Lac du Flambeau. And 2 years ago, when I did it for the first time here, I was anxious for like 3, 4, 5, 6 months beforehand. I was anxious. I'm like, man, God, I want kids to come to the vacation Bible school that we're doing up there. I hope that we have enough service projects for these 50 kids that we're bringing on this trip. I want it to be a good experience. And I was anxious like you wouldn't believe. And then we go on the trip, and God does super cool things on the trip. It was an awesome trip. And I'm sitting there thinking, what in the world was I so anxious about? And then the trip comes up this summer, and it's like all of that desperation, all of that anxiety was gone, and it had turned into faith. That there was faith that, man, God's going to do cool things, and I don't have to be anxious about it or worry about it. Same thing happened with our VBS that we did in the Fourth Ward this summer. For a couple months beforehand, I'm just anxious. Like, I'm hoping that kids come to it. I'm hoping that something good happens. And then it's awesome. And now I get to be excited for the next year because I'm sitting here going, I know I don't have to be desperate. I can have faith that God is going to do cool things. I can have faith that God is willing to move mountains in order to draw people to him. Now, here's the question. What if God didn't move mountains? What if he didn't move the mountains I think that he needed to move? What if that Lac du Flambeau trip the first time had completely bombed? And here's the answer. I think in that moment, if it hadn't turned out the way that I expected it to turn out, I think God would have showed me that it was still what he wanted. See, there's this thing with pastors. We get super insecure about our lives when people don't show up at church or at events. And as a youth pastor, I had to get over this thing of like, there wasn't as many kids at youth group as I wanted one night, and I'm like, oh, I feel awful. Until I started to realize that I could see God doing really cool things in maybe those few kids that were there on a given night, that maybe it wouldn't have happened if a ton of kids had been there. God had to, in my desperation, show me that he was faithful in ways that I wasn't expecting him to be faithful. What do you think the disciples actually expected Jesus to do on this boat? I don't think that they expected that he was just going to stop the storm. I think they expected that he was going to get them out of a bad situation. Because Jesus is wise, and maybe it would be like the time that people were fishing. He's like, hey, throw that net on the side of the boat. And so he was going to say this time, like, just put your oars on this side, and then everybody stand on this side of the boat, and it's going to be all, like, I think they thought something like that was going to happen. They didn't realize that he could completely change the situation altogether. Jesus is able to do more than just get us out of a bad situation. He's able to change the situation altogether. This whole story, this thing about Jesus calming the storm on the sea, what it is it's a precursor to what Jesus was going to do after the cross. See, I want you to understand, Jesus, when he came to this world, the Jews thought that the Messiah that was going to come and bring political peace. That's what they thought. And so Jesus, when he came, that's what people were expecting. If that's who he was going to bring political freedom and political peace. That's the kind of king that they expected. But Jesus decided he was going to be a king that was more than that. He came to do more than just get people out of a political dilemma. He came to bring an end to the only dilemma that actually matters for us, and that is our sin dilemma. You see, when Jesus went to the cross, a lot of people, they lost their hope in who Jesus was because their hope was for something that they wanted here on this earth, what they saw was supposed to happen. But instead, the moment that Jesus walked out of the grave, he became our hope for the only hope that actually matters. He became our only way to a reconciliation with God. He did for us even more than what we expected him to do. Just like what he did for his friends on the boat. They expected him to just like help them get across or help them live through the storm, and he completely changed it. He wiped the storm out. Jesus does more for us than what we would expect him to do. Even Jesus' friends would never quite go beyond clinging to Jesus in despair until they encountered the risen Jesus. See, the risen, supernatural Jesus gives us a reason for a crazy, supernatural kind of faith. When we finally come to grips with this risen Jesus, everything changes. Our faith changes. These guys started to live lives that were thriving. Their ministry, people were coming to Jesus, people were getting healed, all kinds of stuff was happening. Faith that thrives, though, is not an easy thing. We don't see Jesus clearly all the time. Our vision of him gets cloudy. We have to be reminded over and over and over again. But sometimes we can do nothing more than just cling to God in despair. You might be thinking, man, God, I have no clue how you're going to get me out of the financial mountain that I'm under right now. But God, I trust that you have something planned for me. Jesus, I'm hurting because of this broken relationship in my life, but I also believe that you're hurting for me too, that you're a loving Father and you're with me. See, going to God in our despair is never wrong. The bottom line is, he is good, he is loving. Question is where are you struggling to have faith right now? Where do you struggle to have faith in God in the midst of your despair? Psalm 25:7 says, according to your love, remember me, for you, O Lord, are good. He is good, he is loving, and he will remember you in those moments. The other day I was going out for a run, and a lot of times when I'm running, that's my prayer time, and so I was praying, and I started thanking God for something that I don't think I've ever thanked God for before. I was thanking God for never making my financial situation in life so easy that I didn't at least have to have a little bit of faith. And I'm not saying I've had a rough life. I've had a super blessed life. But it's never been so easy where there weren't times of despair or times where I had to put my faith in Jesus. And I'm grateful for that because if it had always been easy, I don't think my faith would be at the place where it is today. So just a couple weeks ago, I go to the mailbox, and I get out the mail, and I take it inside, and there's a letter that doesn't have a return address on it, and I open it up, and some anonymous friend of mine sent me cash in the mail. And that feels good. Like, it never really happens, right? That's a cool thing. And some of you might remember, I think a couple months ago, I was just sharing something about Crystal and I being challenged a little bit in our faith because she didn't get as much work this summer as she normally would, and so things were a little bit tight or whatever, and not bad, but still challenging the faith. And when I got that cash in the mail, the thing was it was not like this answer to our desperation in regards to our finances. It was more a confirmation of the faith that God has built up in us over the years in trusting him with our finances. As we've given back to God, as he's asked us to give back to him, as we've tried to be faithful with our money and not overspend and be generous and those kinds of things, it's become less about God getting us out of bad situations financially. It's become more about letting God be able to do miracles in the midst of some financial struggles. It's a cool thing to see God do supernatural things and to change our situation. He maybe doesn't get us out of all the situations, but he changes the way we look at him, the way we think of him. If you can remember this, I think that your faith may be able to grow to a little bit deeper place. Jesus is less concerned with what is ailing you than with getting your heart to the place that he wants it to be. See, just like Jesus' friends on the boat, you and I, we go to God and we're like, God, just take away all the bad stuff. Fix what's ailing in me. The thing is the thing that ails us the most and that we sometimes neglect is our heart. The thing that God is most concerned about is not the things in life that are ailing us. He's most concerned about, where is your heart in obedience to me? Where is your heart in yielding yourself to me? We're only going to thrive in this life if we're putting our faith in Christ. So I got a few questions for you. The band, you guys can come up. A few questions for you to think about as I wrap this up. Are you living your life with the unyielding knowledge that Jesus is right there with you in the stern of the boat, in the midst of your storms? Have you come to believe that his supernatural power and his grace is all that you really ever need? That it's the only thing that you could ever really need from him? Have you come to see that the most important thing that needs fixing in your life are not all the issues that you see around you, but it's this thing in your heart? You have a heart that is in never-ending need of God's radical grace. Are you willing to bring your despairs to Jesus in the midst of your storms? And are you willing to let him grow those despairs into a place of faith where you're trusting him through every single bit of it? Why don't you pray with me?